8:02 a.m. His secretary called from the hospital. The mafia boss arrived without a word. Two masked men didn't just shatter Nia Holloway's car window at 1:47 in the morning. They reached through the broken glass, grabbed a 32-year-old woman by her collar, and dragged her across jagged edges onto wet Seattle asphalt like she was something disposable. They didn't take her wallet. They didn't take her phone. One of them crouched down beside her while she was still trying to understand what had just happened, pressed his mouth close to her ear, and said 6 words that were never meant as a question. "Tell Kong the books are closed." Then they were gone. And Nia lay on a street that nobody drives down at 2 a.m., rain soaking through her coat, one arm screaming, her temple bleeding, trying to decide whether she was angry or terrified, and realizing, with the kind of clarity that only pain brings, that she was both. If you've ever worked so hard to build something, a career, a reputation, a life that nobody handed you, and then had someone try to take it away in 40 seconds on a dark street, you already understand what Nia felt in that emergency room. And if you've ever wondered what it looks like when a man discovers that the person he never admitted he cared about has been touched, you are about to find out exactly what Kang Tae-won looks like when something breaks inside him. Stay with this story until the end. Subscribe to this channel right now so you don't miss what happens next, because the stories we tell here do not stop at comfortable endings. Drop a like, and before you keep watching, leave a comment telling me the city and country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning of the night that changed everything. The rain had been falling over Seattle since 9 o'clock. By midnight, it had turned mean. Not the soft Pacific Northwest drizzle that tourists romanticize, but hard, freezing, sideways rain that turns every windshield into a blur and every street into a reflection of itself. The kind of night where sensible people are already home, already in bed, already done. Nia Holloway was not done. She had been at her desk inside the Hanseong Pacific Holdings Tower until 11:45, finishing the last review of a warehouse lease termination that she'd been picking at for 3 weeks. Not because she was required to stay, not because anyone had asked her to, but because something about the numbers in that particular file had been nagging at the back of her mind the way a loose thread nags at the corner of a rug, small, irritating, and impossible to ignore once you've noticed it. She finally found it at 11:30. A commercial tenant called Rainier Meridian Freight had been paying an unusually high rate for warehouse space in a facility Hanseong Pacific had acquired 8 months ago. That in itself was not strange. What was strange was the square footage they were paying for versus the actual inventory records from the building's automated loading system. The numbers didn't match. The space was nearly empty. Someone was paying premium rent for nothing, which meant either the tenant was spectacularly bad at math, or the rent payment was serving a purpose that had nothing to do with storing freight. Nia had flagged the account, initiated a regulatory hold on the associated financial assets, and sent the lease termination notice before she shut her laptop. She was not thinking about it when she walked to her car. She was thinking about whether she had enough eggs at home to make a real breakfast before her Thursday morning meeting, and whether the left rear tire that had been slightly low for 2 weeks was something she should deal with before the weekend. She was not thinking about it when the black SUV pulled up alongside her and stopped. She was not thinking about it when the doors opened. By the time she understood what was happening, the first man already had her door handle wrenched open and the second one was behind her. And there was nothing, not her size, not her composure, not her intelligence, none of it, that made the next 40 seconds anything other than what they were. Her temple hit the door frame on the way out. The asphalt was cold and wet and unforgiving. And the man who crouched beside her, who spoke those 6 words into her ear, his voice was completely calm. Not angry, not panicked. Calm. The way someone is calm when they've done a thing enough times that it no longer costs them anything emotionally. Tell Kong the books are closed. Then they were in the SUV and the SUV was gone and Nia was alone. She lay there for probably 12 seconds before her body remembered how to give instructions. Then she was sitting up. Then she was checking her arm, wrong angle, bad pain, possibly broken or possibly not, impossible to tell. Then she was finding her phone in the pocket of her coat because they hadn't taken anything, hadn't wanted anything, had simply delivered a message and left her on the ground to deliver it. She called 911. Then, while she was still waiting, she stared at her phone for a long moment. and she called Kang Tae-won. It was 2:13 a.m. when his private line rang. Tae-won was still at the office. He usually was, at this hour, in the weeks when something complicated was being decided. He was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of the top floor, looking at Elliott Bay, holding a glass of water he hadn't drunk, thinking about a contract dispute with a Vancouver freight operator that had been running for 6 weeks longer than it should have. When Nia's name appeared on his private phone, he answered before the second ring. Not because he was sentimental, because Nia did not call his private line at 2 a.m. unless something was wrong. She told him in under 90 seconds. Her voice was steady. He noticed that, registered it the way he registered everything, which was completely. She told him she'd been pulled from her car, she was at Harborview, she was not critically injured, she thought her arm might be injured, but she was sitting up and she was fine, and someone had told her to tell him the books were closed. He said, "I'm coming." She said, "You don't need to." He had already ended the call. He did not take his security detail. He took his car, his coat, and the particular expression he wore when something had happened that he intended to respond to personally. His driver offered to come. Tae-won said no with a single look, and the driver stepped back. The drive to Harborview took 11 minutes in the rain at 2 a.m. Tae-won spent those 11 minutes completely silent. Anyone who had worked for him long enough would have recognized the silence. It was not the silence of a man who was thinking. It was the silence of a man who had already finished thinking and was now simply waiting to arrive. The emergency room at that hour is its own world. Fluorescent lights that are too bright. Chairs that are uncomfortable by design. The persistent low-level sound of someone else's distress always present at the edge of hearing. Medical staff moving with the specific efficiency of people who have learned to conserve everything, motion, emotion, energy, because they will need all of it before the shift ends. Nia was in the second curtained bay. She was sitting upright on the examination bed, her arms supported in a temporary sling, white gauze taped along her temple, where 3 stitches held the cut closed, her left cheek beginning to show the deep purple green of a bruise that was still deciding how bad it intended to be. Her coat was beside her, ruined. Her hair, which was always neat, was not neat. She looked like someone who had been put through something. She was also reviewing something on her phone when Tae-won came through the curtain, because Nia Holloway did not stop working simply because she had been assaulted. That was not a virtue exactly. It was a coping mechanism, and she knew it, and she had never particularly wanted to address it. She looked up. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Tae-won stood in the entrance of the curtained bay in a charcoal coat still wet from the parking lot, and he looked at her, at the stitches, at the bruise, at the sling, and something happened behind his expression that Nia could not fully name because she had never seen it on him before. It was not anger. It was something older than anger, something that had been sitting below anger waiting for an occasion. She said, "I'm sorry for calling so late." His jaw tightened. He said nothing. He walked in, pulled the one plastic chair in the room to the side of the bed, and sat down. Not standing over her, sitting beside her. That small calibration, that particular decision, was the first thing that surprised her, and she filed it immediately. Then he took off his coat and put it around her shoulders, over the flimsy hospital blanket, without asking whether she wanted it. She did not argue. It was warm. She hadn't realized she was cold. "Tell me," he said. She told him everything. The Rainier Meridian file, the lease termination, the hold she'd placed on the associated accounts, the SUV, the 40 seconds, the 6 words. She was precise. She did not editorialize. She gave him facts in the order they occurred, the way she always did, because that was how her mind organized itself, and because she had learned years ago that Tae-won did not want to be managed. He wanted to be informed and then left to reach his own conclusions. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your arm. Possibly fractured. They're waiting on imaging." "Does it hurt?" It wasn't really a question. She answered it anyway. "Yes." He nodded, like he was logging it, like that piece of information was going somewhere specific and would be retrieved later. "I've been thinking," Nia said carefully, "that I should probably resign." The room temperature dropped about 4 degrees. She watched his face and saw the thing move through it. Not surprise, not agreement, but something that settled into a particular hardness around his eyes and mouth. "No," he said. "Tae-won, no." He said it the same way both times. Not loudly. He rarely needed volume. You are not resigning. Someone used me to deliver a message. That means they know who I am, they know what I do, and they're willing to put their hands on me to get what they want. That makes me a liability to stop. He leaned forward, forearms on his knees, and looked at her directly. You are not a liability. You are the reason I know what they want. You are the reason I know who sent them. You stop talking about resigning. Nia looked at him for a long moment. In 5 years, she had learned to read the spaces between what Kang Tae-won said. The pauses, the redirections, the things he chose not to say. She was very good at it. What he was not saying right now was louder than most conversations she'd had in her life. All right, she said finally. He sat back. A nurse came in, asked Tae-won to step out for the imaging. He stepped out. He stood in the hallway outside the curtain and did not move for the 45 minutes the process took, which the nursing staff found either impressive or unsettling, depending on who was watching. The imaging showed a hairline fracture in the smaller forearm bone, not surgical. A proper splint, 6 weeks, physical therapy if needed. The doctor on duty, a tired woman in her 50s who had clearly seen everything, gave Nia discharge instructions and 2 prescriptions and told her she was lucky, and meant it. Nia thanked her. Tae-won said nothing to the doctor, which the doctor found appropriate given the hour and the circumstances. They walked out through the ER entrance at 3:47 a.m. The rain was still going. Tae-won had brought his car around while Nia was completing discharge paperwork, and it was idling at the curb directly in front of the doors, which was technically not a legal parking position, but the security guard at the door had taken one look at the car and decided not to address it. Nia got in. Tae-won drove. They were on I-90 heading toward Mercer Island when Nia said, I should go home. My apartment is not where you're going. She turned her head to look at him. His eyes were on the road. His hands were on the wheel with the kind of controlled grip that looked relaxed and wasn't. I'm not going to your estate, Tae-won. I'm fine. I have a splint. I have prescriptions. They know your apartment. That landed. She turned back to face the windshield. He was right. Of course he was right. Whoever had sent those 2 men knew where she parked her car, knew what time she left the office, knew enough about her routine to intercept her cleanly on a deserted street at 1:47 in the morning. Her apartment address was not a secret. For how long, she said, until I understand what we're dealing with. You said we. He didn't respond to that, but he didn't correct it either. Nia looked out at the rain-slicked highway, at the orange sodium lights overhead, at the black water of Lake Washington visible through the bridge railings. Everything outside the car looked cold and complicated. Inside the car, it was warm, and someone was driving, and she did not have to make any decisions for the next several minutes. She was more tired than she had realized. Her head went back against the headrest. Tae-won glanced at her once, then returned his eyes to the road. He drove. She did not sleep exactly, but she was closer to it than she'd been all night when the car turned through the gate of his Mercer Island estate, and the gate closed behind them, and she registered, somewhere at the edge of her exhaustion, that the sound of rain on the roof of the car had changed slightly, and that she was, for the moment, somewhere that the people who had put their hands on her tonight could not reach. She hated that this was a relief. She was also too tired to pretend it wasn't. Inside the estate, Tae-won's private physician, a Korean-American man in his early 60s named Dr. Seong, who appeared to have dressed in under 3 minutes and still looked more composed than most people managed in daylight, examined Nia's arm properly, confirmed the ER's fracture assessment, fitted a better splint, handed her medication for pain and swelling, and told her she needed to sleep before she needed anything else. Nia thanked him. Tae-won walked the doctor out. When he came back, Nia was sitting in the chair beside the window in the guest room she'd been shown to, still in her ruined work clothes, the new splint pale against her dark forearm, the bruise on her cheek deepening toward its full color. She had her phone in her hand. She was not looking at it. She was looking at the window, at the rain running down the glass, at the black surface of the lake beyond. Tae-won stopped in the doorway. He had removed his jacket somewhere. He looked, not less controlled than usual, because she was not sure that was possible, but the edges were slightly different, slightly less maintained. There was something working in him that he hadn't finished processing, and it was showing in small ways that she doubted he realized. You should sleep, he said. I know. But... She looked at him. The message they left, she said. Tell Kang the books are closed. They said it like it was a demand, like there's something specific they want released. He was quiet. The account hold I placed on Rainier Meridian. It wasn't just a flag. I froze the associated assets entirely because the discrepancy met the threshold for regulatory referral. Whatever money is sitting in those accounts. She paused. They didn't attack me because they were angry. They attacked me because they think I'm the one who can undo it. Tae-won's expression changed. Not dramatically, just shifted. The way something shifts when a piece of information arrives that changes the shape of everything around it. Sleep, he said. We start in the morning. What does that mean? We start... Sleep, Nia. She looked at him for a moment. He was still in the doorway. He hadn't moved to leave. She said, "Thank you for coming." Something moved across his face, too quickly to name. "Don't thank me for that," he said. Then he left. Nia sat in the chair for another few minutes after he was gone, listening to the rain, feeling the low throb of her forearm through the medication, looking at her own reflection in the dark window. Bruised, tired, splinted, sitting in a crime lord's guest room at 4 in the morning because someone had dragged her across wet asphalt to use her as a messenger. She thought about the Rainier Meridian account. She thought about the frozen assets. She thought about the very specific calm in that man's voice when he delivered his message into her ear. And she thought, not for the last time, not yet fully understanding what the thought meant, that whoever had sent those men had made a calculation about which person in Kang Tae-won's orbit was the most vulnerable. They had chosen her. They had been completely wrong. She just didn't know yet exactly how wrong. She slept 4 hours. Not because 4 hours was enough. It wasn't, and her body made that clear the moment she opened her eyes. But because at 8:15 in the morning, her phone vibrated against the nightstand with a message from a number she didn't recognize, and the message contained 3 words that put her upright before she'd fully processed waking up. "We know you're there." She stared at it. Her arm throbbed. Her temple, where the stitches pulled slightly when she moved her face, reminded her of exactly what had happened 6 hours ago. The bruise on her cheek had finished deciding how bad it intended to be, and the answer was bad. She could feel the swelling without touching it. She got up, found her ruined coat from the night before hanging over the back of the chair, and pulled her notepad from the inside pocket. The small one she'd carried for 7 years. The one she used for the kind of thinking she didn't trust to any device that could be accessed by anyone else. She sat back on the edge of the bed and wrote the 3 words down. Then she wrote underneath them, how did they get this number? Then, how did they know which property? She was still writing when Tae-won knocked twice and opened the door. He was already dressed. Dark suit, no tie, the jacket unbuttoned. He looked like someone who had slept 3 hours or none, and had made a decision somewhere in the night that had settled him into a particular mode of operation that she recognized. Focused, contained, slightly dangerous to be around. He looked at her sitting on the edge of the bed with the notepad and didn't seem surprised. "You got the message," he said. She looked up. "You know about it." "My security team monitors all devices on this network. When a message comes in from an unregistered source to a guest device, I'm notified." He walked in, stopped a few feet from her, looked at the notepad. "What are you writing?" "Questions I don't have answers to yet." She held it up so he could see. "How did they know I was here? How did they get the number I used specifically for Hanseong Pacific correspondence? How did they identify which account hold was theirs?" She lowered the notepad. "That last one is the one that concerns me most. The Rainier Meridian flag was internal. It was sitting in a pending review queue. Nobody outside of Hanseong Pacific's compliance systems should have known that flag existed, let alone that I was the one who placed it." Tae-won was quiet for a moment. "Get dressed," he said. "There's food downstairs. We talk when you're ready." "I'm ready now." "Nia." "I'm ready now, Tae-won." He looked at her. She was sitting on the edge of a bed in yesterday's clothes with a splint on her arm and 3 stitches in her temple and a bruise that was going to look worse before it looked better, and she was holding a notepad full of questions, and her expression was the one he had learned in 5 years, meant that the conversation was going to happen whether or not he felt it was the right time. He pulled the chair from the corner, turned it around, sat down. "Talk," he said. "We have a leak," she said. "Inside Hanseong Pacific. Someone with access to the compliance queue passed information about the Rainier Meridian hold to whoever ordered that attack. That's the only explanation for the timing. I placed the flag at 11:30. I was in my car by 11:50. They were waiting for me. She paused. 20 minutes. Tae-won, whoever got that information, moved on it in 20 minutes. That's not casual. That's someone who was already watching, already waiting, and already had a crew positioned. The silence in the room after that was the kind that has weight. Tae-won's jaw worked once, just once, then it stopped. How many people have access to the compliance queue? He said. At the level that would show individual flags with the name of the reviewing officer? 4. Myself, Daniel Yoon in legal, the system administrator, and whoever has administrator override privileges, which per the network architecture is your access level, and one other. She met his eyes. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm not asking you to look at people you trust. You think it was one of those 4. I think whoever it was had that access or bought it from someone who did. She set the notepad down on her knee. And I think you need to find them before I go anywhere near your financial systems again. Because if there's a hole in the wall, everything I do from inside becomes visible to the people outside. Tae-won stood up. He crossed to the window. The lake was gray and flat under low cloud, the rain from last night reduced to a fine mist that blurred the tree line on the far shore. He stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, and Nia watched the set of his shoulders and understood that she had just told him something he had already suspected and had been hoping she wouldn't confirm. Daniel Yoon has been with me 11 years, he said. I know. He was there when there was nothing, when there was no holding company, no shipping contracts, no legitimate face on any of it. I know that too. If I go to him with this, don't go to him with it, Nia said. Don't go to any of them. Give me access to the system logs from last night. Activity records, login timestamps, query histories. If someone pulled the Rainier Meridian file between 11 and midnight, it will show. You don't have to ask anyone anything. The records will tell us. He turned around. She held his gaze. After a long moment, he said, After breakfast. She looked at her clothes. I'm going to need something to wear. He almost said something. She could see it. The almost. Then he just said, There are things in the closet. My sister stays here sometimes. She's roughly your size. He left before she could respond to that. Nia sat for a moment in the quiet. His sister stays here sometimes. Filed. Everything got filed. She got up, found this closet, found an olive green sweater and dark trousers that fit well enough, changed with the particular awkward care required when one arm is in a splint and pain is a factor in every motion. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for a long moment. The bruise was bad. The stitches were neat, at least. The ER doctor had been good at her job. The circles under her eyes were the kind that powder couldn't completely fix. She wasn't carrying powder. She went downstairs. The kitchen of Tae-won's estate was large and unremarkable in the way that expensive things sometimes are. The appliances were professional grade, the surfaces were clean stone, and there was nothing decorative about any of it. A woman who Nia understood to be the household staff's morning person had left food on the counter: rice, soup, sliced fruit, coffee. She had not stayed. Tae-won was at the kitchen table with a laptop and his phone and a cup of coffee that appeared to be his second or third. He looked up when she came in, looked at the sweater, looked away. Nia poured coffee, sat down across from him, picked up a spoon for the soup and said, What do you know about Rainier Meridian? Not enough. Not yet. He turned the laptop toward her. My people ran an initial trace this morning. The company is registered in Delaware, filed in Washington State. Management address is a mailbox in a Bellevue office park. 3 layers of LLC structure underneath it. Nia pulled the laptop closer with her good hand and read. She read for 2 full minutes. Then she said, This is Callahan. Tae-won said nothing. The Callahan organization uses this exact LLC layering structure. I've seen it before in 2 other properties that crossed my desk. Both times the beneficial ownership eventually traced to a holding entity with connections to Callahan-adjacent operators. She looked up. You already knew. I suspected, he said. I wanted to know if the financial structure confirmed it before I moved. It confirms it. She pushed the laptop back. But that's not actually what concerns me right now. The Callahans have been bleeding money for 2 years, losing freight contracts, losing territory, losing the waterfront positions they held since the 90s. They don't have the resources to start a war with you. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, out of habit, flinched slightly when her splinted arm protested, adjusted. So why are they doing this? Why spend whatever it costs to run a crew, identify me, track my car, put 2 men on the street at 2 in the morning? Why do all of that for a compliance hold that I could theoretically release with 4 clicks? Because they're desperate, Tae-won said. More than desperate. She set the cup down. Someone told them I could release it. Someone made them believe that frightening me was the fastest path to their money. Which means, whoever our leak is, they didn't just hand over information about the flag. They told the Callahans that I was the decision maker, that I was the one to pressure. She let that sit for a second. That's not information. That's a strategy. Whoever leaked it didn't just want money from the Callahans. They wanted the Callahans to come after me specifically. The kitchen was very quiet. Tae-won was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully categorize because it was layered, something beneath the surface of the controlled exterior, something that had been sitting closer to the surface since last night and had not fully retreated. You think the leak is also trying to remove you, he said. I think it's possible that the Callahans weren't the only ones who wanted me gone. She said it simply because it was the logical conclusion, and she had never been in the habit of softening logic to make it easier to hear. Someone inside Hanseong Pacific gave them information, gave them a strategy, and gave them a reason to act. That's 2 separate parties with 2 separate motives using each other. Tae-won stood up. He walked to the counter, put his cup down, stood with his back to her. His hands were flat on the counter, and she could see from across the kitchen that the muscle in his forearm was tight. That particular tension. I need those system logs, she said. I know. And I need you to not do anything about the Callahans yet. Not until I know how much money we're talking about in those frozen accounts, and where the rest of their liquidity is sitting, because if you move on them before I understand their financial position, you might push them into a corner that costs you more than it costs them. He turned around. You're telling me how to run an operation, he said. I'm telling you how to win one, she said. The temperature between them shifted. It happened quickly. One of those conversational moments where the ground changes beneath everyone's feet, and nobody moves, but everything is different. Tae-won looked at her across the kitchen. She held it. He said, You should have stayed a forensic accountant. I am a forensic accountant. No. Something in his voice dropped slightly. A forensic accountant looks at the numbers and reports what she finds. What you're doing is different. She didn't answer that. He crossed back to the table, sat down, opened a second window on the laptop, and entered a series of credentials that she understood she was not supposed to see, but he was showing her anyway. The system logs appeared. Activity records from the Hanseong Pacific Compliance Network, time-stamped, user-authenticated. There, he said. Find your leak set. She found it in 40 minutes. Not because it was hidden well, but because it wasn't hidden at all. It was simply buried in the kind of routine-looking activity that most people would have scanned past without stopping. A query on the Rainier Meridian file at 11:42 p.m., 11 minutes after Nia had placed the hold. The username was the system administrator account. The query lasted 4 minutes, long enough to pull the full file, the flag details, and the name of the reviewing officer. 4 minutes. Then nothing. Nia sat back. Her arm was aching and she was ignoring it. She had been ignoring it for 40 minutes because the numbers in front of her were more important than the pain in her arm, and that was simply the hierarchy that her mind imposed on things, had always imposed on things, since she was 23 years old and working 70-hour weeks, and learning that the only competition that mattered was with herself. The system administrator account, she said. Tae-won, who had been on his phone 3 feet away for the last 20 minutes, ended his call. Marcus Webb, she said, your network administrator, 11:42, 4 minutes. He pulled everything. She turned the laptop toward him. He's been with you. 7 years, Tae-won said. He was looking at the screen and his voice was entirely flat. I'm sorry. Don't be. Close the laptop. Where is he? He'll be in the office by 9. She checked the clock. 8:53. Tae-won picked up his phone. She watched him make a call that lasted 20 seconds. She understood from his tone and from the Korean words she recognized, not many, but enough, that he was giving an instruction, and the instruction was being received without question. When he hung up, she said, What did you tell them? To make sure Marcus Webb doesn't leave this building this morning. And then, he looked at her. And then I'm going to have a conversation with Marcus Webb. Tae-won, this is not the part where you advise me, he said. His voice was still flat, and it was more frightening that way than if he'd raised it. This is the part where I handle something inside my organization. She held his gaze. If you frighten him before I understand the full scope of what he shared, you might lose information you can't recover, she said. The Callahans didn't just get the account flag. They got my name, my role, a strategy for using me as leverage. Marcus Webb either told them all of that, or he told someone who passed it on. I need to know which one. I need to know who else is in the chain. A long pause. How long? He said. Give me 2 hours in their financial records before you go anywhere near Marcus Webb. 2 hours, and I'll give you a complete picture of what the Callahans know, what they're holding, what they think they can do. Then you can do whatever you're going to do, and it will actually mean something. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, 2 hours. She worked at the kitchen table with the laptop and a separate tablet. Tae-won's security chief, a broad-shouldered Korean man named Jin, who looked at Nia with the practiced neutrality of someone very good at not showing what he thought, had brought from the estate's equipment room. Tae-won sat across the room on the phone. Occasionally he was not on the phone, and those were the moments she could feel him watching her, though every time she looked up, he was looking somewhere else. She filed that too. What she found in the Callahan financial structure over the next 90 minutes built itself into a picture that was both cleaner and more alarming than she'd expected. The $6 million in the Rainier Meridian accounts wasn't an isolated asset. It was the working capital for a laundering rotation. Money cycled through the warehouse rent payments, then moved through a series of legitimate-looking freight invoices, then extracted through a third-party payment processor that existed specifically for this purpose. The $6 million frozen by Nia's hold represented approximately 40% of the Callahans' liquid operating cash. 40%. Not a setback. A hemorrhage. She kept going. The remaining liquidity was split across several physical cash reserves. She couldn't see those directly, but she could see the payment patterns, the contractor invoices, the security crew disbursements that had to be coming from somewhere. And by working backwards from the amounts and the timing, she could triangulate roughly where the cash facilities had to be positioned in the industrial corridor south of downtown. She was building a map from numbers, which was, when she thought about it clearly, exactly what she had always done. At 10:48, she said, "Come here." Tae-won was off the phone. He came and stood behind her left shoulder and looked at the screen. She walked him through it. The liquidity picture, the rotation structure, the 40% hemorrhage, the cash facility distribution. She kept it precise and moved fast and watched him absorb it with the particular efficiency of someone who had spent decades making rapid decisions with incomplete information. When she finished, she said, "The $6 million is not what they want back the most. It's what they can't function without. Their entire contractor payment structure depends on that rotation completing. Without it, they have roughly 3 to 4 weeks of operating reserves before the people working for them stop getting paid. And when they stop getting paid," Tae-won said, "they stop working. And when they stop working, the organization falls apart from inside. That's how it works when loyalty is bought rather than built," she said. She did not mean it as a comment on him specifically, but she felt him receive it, and she did not apologize for it. He straightened up, stood behind her for a moment longer. Then he said, "What do you need to make that happen faster?" She turned to look up at him. Over her shoulder, from this angle, he was very close, and she registered that with the same efficiency she registered everything, noted it, gave it appropriate weight, kept moving. "Access to their remaining accounts," she said. "Not the frozen one. The active ones. If I can identify the payment processor they're using to complete the rotation, I can file a suspicious activity report that triggers a secondary hold. Combine that with the existing freeze and their remaining liquidity gets cut in half inside a week. Can you do that legally?" She held his gaze. "The suspicious activity is real. The report would be accurate. Whether the timing is—" She stopped, started again. "I'm a forensic accountant filing a report on a pattern I genuinely identified. The report is legitimate. The consequences of it are what they are." Tae-won looked at her for a moment. "You've never filed anything like this before," he said. "No. You've always stayed on the side of the legitimate operations." "Yes. If you file this, you can't unfile it. I know that. And you still want to. She thought about the wet asphalt, the hands pulling her across broken glass, the calm voice in her ear at 2 in the morning like she was nothing, like she was the easiest variable to remove from an equation. I want them to not be able to do this to anyone else, she said. Whatever their reasons were for choosing me, I want to make sure those reasons become irrelevant. The best way to do that is to make them too broke to field a crew. Tae-won was quiet. His hand came to rest on the back of her chair. Not on her shoulder. On the chair. That 1.5 inches of distance was deliberate, and she understood it as such. 2 more things, he said. She waited. Marcus Webb, when you're ready. All right. And tonight, he said, you're staying here again. Don't argue about it. She looked at the screen. The Callahan liquidity map, the payment processor identification, the cash facility distribution. Her map. Her work. Built in 90 minutes from a kitchen table in a crime lord's estate with a splint on her arm and 3 stitches in her temple. I need clothes, she said. Something crossed his face. Brief. She caught it. I'll have someone bring them, he said. Marcus Webb was 41 years old, originally from Tacoma, had a daughter in middle school and a car payment and a mortgage in Renton that he was 14 months behind on. Nia knew all of this before she walked into the small conference room on the ground floor of the estate where Jin had been sitting with Marcus for the better part of 2 hours while everyone waited for the moment to arrive. Marcus was a medium-sized man with thinning hair and the specific expression of someone who has been sitting in a room for 2 hours with a very large, very silent Korean man and has arrived at a complete understanding of how badly they have miscalculated something. He looked at Nia when she came in, then he looked at Tae-won behind her, then he looked at the table. Nia sat down across from him. Tae-won stood against the wall. Jin left. Marcus, Nia said. He was looking at the table. Look at me, please. He looked up. His face was doing several things at once, none of them successfully concealed. I'm going to tell you what I know, she said, and then I'm going to ask you one question. How you answer that question determines what happens next. Do you understand? He swallowed, nodded. At 11:42 last night, someone using your system administrator credentials pulled the Rainier Meridian compliance file from the Hanseong Pacific Network. The query ran for 4 minutes and accessed my name, my role designation, and the full details of the hold I'd placed 40 minutes earlier. By 1:47 a.m., 2 men had dragged me out of my car on a deserted street. She kept her voice level. I have a fractured arm and 3 stitches and a bruise on my face. And the only way any of that happens in the timeline it happened is if the information from that query moved immediately to someone who needed it. Marcus was very pale. The question, she said, is simple. Who did you send it to? A long silence. His hands were flat on the table and they were trembling very slightly. I need, he started. Don't, Tae-won said from the wall. Just that one word. Flat. Final. Marcus closed his mouth. Nia waited. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice had the particular quality of a man who has done the math and understood that there is only one direction that has any chance of ending well. He spoke for 11 minutes. By the end of it, Nia's notepad had 6 names on it, a phone number, a meeting location in Sodu, and the name of the man inside the Callahan organization who had recruited Marcus Webb 18 months ago with the offer of enough money to save the house in Renton. 6 names. One of them was Daniel Yoon. Nia did not look at Tae-won when she wrote it down. She heard from the wall the very slow, very controlled exhale of a man processing something that costs him a great deal. 11 years. She wrote the name, closed the notepad, looked at Marcus Webb, who was staring at the table again with the expression of a man who has just set something on fire and cannot now complain about the smoke. Thank you, she said. She stood up. She walked to the door. Behind her, Tae-won had not moved from the wall. She stopped with her hand on the door frame and said, without turning around, the Callahans have a contact meeting scheduled in Sodu tonight at 9. Marcus just gave you everything you need to be there first. A pause. I'll have the payment processor identification ready before noon, she said, and the suspicious activity report filed before 2. Another pause. Longer. And when you talk to Daniel, she said carefully, just find out why before you decide anything. 11 years is a long time. There might be a reason. She did not look back. She walked down the hall, back toward the kitchen, back toward the laptop and the financial map she had been building, back toward the work that was the only thing she had ever been completely certain of. Her hand, on the doorframe, had been steady. In the kitchen, alone, it shook for about 30 seconds. She waited it out. Then she sat back down and opened the laptop and went back to the numbers, because the numbers were something she could control, and because the report she was about to file was going to put her name on the wrong side of a line she had spent 5 years standing carefully behind, and because whatever happened next, to the Callahans, to Daniel Yoon, to Tae-won's 11-year loyalty, to herself, it was already too late to choose a different direction. She had frozen the money before she knew what it was. She had found the leak before she understood what it would cost. And she had written Daniel Yoon's name in her notepad with the same hand that was now pulling up the suspicious activity report template, and the form was loading on the screen, and her name was already in the reviewing officer field, and all she had to do was fill in the rest. She started typing. The suspicious activity report took 40 minutes to complete properly. Not because the form was complicated. Nia had filed dozens of them over her career, knew the fields by memory, knew exactly which language triggered the fastest regulatory response, and which phrasing created ambiguity that could slow a review by weeks. She knew how to do this. The 40 minutes was because she did it 3 times. The first version she deleted after 12 minutes because she had used language that was accurate but survivable. The kind of filing that looks serious on paper and produces a letter and a 30-day review window, and ultimately inconveniences the target without destroying them. She deleted it. The second version she got further into before she stopped, read it back, and understood that she was still writing like someone who expected to walk this back later. Someone who was leaving a door open. She deleted that one too. The third version she wrote like a woman who had been pulled across broken glass at 2 in the morning and had decided, somewhere between the hospital and this kitchen table, that she was done leaving doors open for people who had chosen to use her as a pressure point. She filed it at 1:58 p.m. Regulatory system receipt confirmation appeared on her screen 11 seconds later. She closed the laptop, sat very still for a moment. Then she opened it again and went back to the Callahan financial map, because sitting still was not something her mind permitted when there was still work to do, and there was still a great deal of work to do, and the alternative to working was thinking about Daniel Yoon's name in her notepad, and she was not ready to think about that yet. She heard Tae-won's footsteps in this hallway at 2:15. He came in, looked at her, looked at the laptop, looked at the clock on the wall. "It's filed," she said, before he could ask. He poured coffee, stood at the counter, did not sit. "Daniel," she said. Not a question. "I spoke with him this morning." His voice was completely controlled in the way that control costs something. "Alone." "And?" A pause. "He confirmed it," Tae-won said. Nia put her hand flat on the table, just to have something solid under it. "How long?" 14 months. He drank the coffee, set the cup down. "He says the Callahans approached him with a business proposition, consulting fees paid through a clean LLC. He told himself it wasn't disloyal because he was only providing financial structure advice, not operational information. He says he didn't know they would use it to..." He stopped. "Use it to identify me as a target," Nia said. "He says he didn't know." The kitchen was very quiet. "Do you believe him?" she said. Tae-won looked at the window. "I believe he told himself that." "I don't know if it's true." A beat. "It doesn't change what he did." "No," she said. "It doesn't." She looked at her notepad. Daniel Yoon's name, 11 years. She thought about what it costs a person to make a decision like that, not in the dramatic version, where people turn villainous overnight with clear motivations, but in the real version, where someone wakes up one morning and makes a small compromise and then another, and each one feels survivable because the previous one already happened. She understood the mechanism. She did not excuse the result. "What happens to him?" she said. "He's gone. Flat. Final. From the company. From everything." Tae-won paused. "I'm not going to..." He stopped again, started differently. "He has a family. I'm not going to destroy what's left of his life beyond removing him. But he is gone." Nia nodded. She did not say anything else about Daniel Yoon. She had written his name, and it had cost Tae-won something visible, and she was not going to add to that cost by dwelling in it. Some things you acknowledge once, and then you keep moving. Not because they don't matter, but because staying in them doesn't help anyone. The Sodu meeting tonight, she said. Marcus gave you a location. Warehouse on Airport Way, 9 p.m. He turned from the window. I'm going. I know you're going. I need you to let me set something up first. He looked at her. If your people go in there and the Callahans panic, the money moves. Whatever they have positioned, whatever emergency transfer protocol they've built in, it fires, and the assets scatter, and I lose the thread. She turned the tablet toward him, showing the payment processor identification she'd spent the morning building. But if I can get into this processor's transaction queue before 9 o'clock, I can put a flag on every outgoing transfer over $10,000. The moment they try to move anything tonight, it freezes automatically. They can't scatter the money because the money is already locked before they know what's happening. Tae-won studied the screen. That requires access to the processor's internal system, he said. Yes. That's not a regulatory filing. I know what it is. She held his gaze. Do you have someone who can get me inside that system? A long pause. Yes, he said. Then I need them in the next 4 hours. He picked up his phone. The person he sent her was not what she expected. Jin brought her up from the lower level of the estate at 3:30 p.m. A young Korean-American woman, mid-20s, small, wearing a university hoodie and carrying a laptop that had more custom hardware attached to it than anything Nia had seen outside of a financial forensics lab. She sat down across from Nia at the kitchen table with the particular energy of someone extremely competent who has also consumed a significant amount of caffeine. Her name was Soo Yeon. She did not offer a last name. She looked at the tablet Nia had been working on, looked at Nia's splint, looked at the bruise on her face, and said, Okay, walk me through what you need. Nia walked her through it. Soo-yeon asked 4 questions, all of them technical and precise, none of them unnecessary. Nia answered them. Soo-yeon started typing. They worked like that for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Nia identifying the specific transaction flags she needed, Soo-yeon building the mechanism to place them. Both of them moving fast because the clock was moving, and neither of them had the kind of personality that permitted slowing down when something needed to be finished. At one point, Soo-yeon said, without looking up from her screen, You're the one who froze the 6 million. Yes, Nia said, by accident. I flagged a suspicious lease. The freeze was automatic. Soo-yeon made a sound that was almost a laugh. You accidentally strangled them and they sent 2 guys to a hospital instead of just asking nicely. She shook her head. Wild. They weren't in a position to ask nicely, Nia said. They were in a position to be frightened. Soo-yeon glanced at her, looked back at her screen. Are you frightened? Nia thought about it honestly, the way she tried to think about most things honestly. I was last night. Right now, I'm busy. That's about the same thing, Soo-yeon said. For people like us. Nia did not ask what she meant by people like us. She understood it. At 6:12 p.m., the flag system was in place inside the payment processor's transaction queue. Any outgoing transfer over $10,000 from any account associated with the Callahan Financial Network would trigger an automatic hold. The trigger was invisible from the outside. It would look like a normal processing delay until the transfer failed, at which point the Callahans would know something was wrong. But by then, the money would already be frozen, and the freeze would require a regulatory reversal that would take weeks. Soo-yeon closed her laptop, stood up, stretched, and said, Done. You want me here tonight? Nia looked at her. You monitor systems remotely? From anywhere with a connection. A small shrug. I can watch the transaction queue from my apartment and text you if anything moves. Yes, Nia said. Please. Soo-yeon left. Nia sat at the table and looked at what they had built together and felt, for a brief moment, something that was close to satisfaction before the part of her brain that never fully stopped working pointed out that the Sodu meeting was in 2 hours and 48 minutes, and there were still things she did not know. She pulled up the notepad. 6 names for Marcus. Daniel Yoon removed, 5 remaining in the chain. She knew 4 of them, Callahan-adjacent contractors, men who moved money and freight and did not ask too many questions. The 5th name she had looked at 3 times during the day and had not been able to place. Raymond Che, Korean name, no connection she could find to any Callahan entity, no record in the Hanseong Pacific Contractor database, no registration in any of the LLC structures she'd mapped. She stared at the name. Something about it pulled at the edge of her thinking. She picked up her phone and called Su Yan, who answered on the second ring. "The name Raymond Che," Nia said. "Can you run it?" "Against what database?" "Start with Washington State business filings and work outward." A keyboard sound, a pause. "I'm seeing a Raymond Che with a registered business address in Bellevue. Financial consulting firm, founded 6 years ago. No public clients listed." 6 years ago, Nia said. Something went cold in her chest. 6 years ago was 1 year before she joined Hanseong Pacific. "What's the firm's name?" she said. "Pacific Meridian Consulting Group." She did not say anything for a moment. Pacific Meridian. Rainier Meridian Freight. The same naming construction, the same geographic word paired with the same second word. The kind of deliberate parallel that someone uses when they want to be able to find their own things later. An internal filing system expressed as a business name. "Suyeon," she said carefully, "can you find any financial connection between Pacific Meridian Consulting Group and any Hanseong Pacific entity? Any payment, any contract, anything at all?" A longer pause this time. "Yeah," Suyeon said. There's a consulting services contract, paid quarterly, executed 5 years and 9 months ago." Another pause. "The signatory on the Hanseong Pacific side is Daniel Yoon." Nia's hand went flat on the table. "The amount," she said, 40,000 a quarter, for 3 years, then it stops." Keys. "Last payment was 2 years and 3 months ago." She sat very still. 40,000 a quarter for 3 years. That was $480,000 paid from Hanseong Pacific accounts to a consulting firm that had no public clients and was registered 3 months before Daniel Yoon signed the contract. This was not Daniel Yoon consulting for the Callahans 14 months ago. This was Daniel Yoon in a financial relationship with a Callahan-adjacent entity that predated that by years, which meant the story Taiwan had been told this morning, the one where Daniel compromised himself 14 months ago and told himself it was minor, was not the whole story. It was the story Daniel had calculated was safe to admit. "Send me everything you have on Pacific Meridian," Nia said, "right now." "Sending." She ended the call. The files came through in 40 seconds. She opened them at the kitchen table and began reading with the focused, systematic attention that was the thing she had trained for a decade and a half, and the thing that nobody who looked at her ever expected, because she was warm and she smiled easily and she had a gentle voice, and people consistently mistook gentleness for softness until she put their numbers on a table and showed them exactly what their own record said about them. What the record said about Raymond Che and Pacific Meridian Consulting Group and Daniel Yoon was worse than 14 months. It was 5.5 years. She found Taiwan in the lower level, not the command center. She didn't know about that yet. A different room, what appeared to be a strategy room, with maps on a wall table and 3 of his people gathered around something she couldn't see from the doorway. Jin was there. 2 others she recognized from the estate's security rotation. They all looked up when she appeared in the doorway. She said, "I need to speak with you." Taiwan looked at her expression. He said something in Korean to the 3 men. They left, moving past Nia with the careful, neutral courtesy of people who have been told to clear a room and are doing it efficiently. Jin was the last one out. He glanced at Nia as he passed. She couldn't read what was in it. Taewon waited. She came in, put the tablet on the map table, and said, "The story Daniel told you this morning is not complete." He was very still. She walked him through it. The Pacific Meridian contract, the 40,000 a quarter, the 3 years of payments, the naming parallel to Rainier Meridian. She kept it precise and moved at the pace she moved when the information was serious enough to require no embellishment. When she finished, Taiwan was looking at the tablet screen and his hands were at his sides and very still. 5.5 years, he said. The contract starts 5 years and 9 months ago, 3 months after Raymond Che registered the firm. Who is Raymond Che? I don't know yet. The name isn't in anything I can access. He might be a front, might be a real operator who keeps himself clean. But whoever he is, he's been receiving Hanseong Pacific money channeled through Daniel Yoon for 3 years. And then 2 years after the payments stop, Daniel starts feeding the Callahans operational information. She paused. I don't think the payments stopped because Daniel ended the relationship. I think they stopped because the relationship changed form. Tae-won turned away from the table. He walked to the wall, stood with his back to her. She waited. "Where's Daniel now?" he said. "I don't know. You sent him home this morning." He pulled out his phone. The call he made lasted 4 seconds before it went to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. He called someone else. One of his people, she understood from the exchange. Someone tasked with locating. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. When it ended, his expression had changed in a way that made the room feel different. "His car is at his house," Tae-won said. "He's not inside." "How long?" "His wife says he left 2 hours ago on foot. Said he needed air." A pause. "She's not worried. I am." Nia thought about that. Daniel Yoon, given a partial rope this morning, sent home with the understanding that he was removed but not destroyed. Then sitting in his house for 6 hours knowing that Nia was at the estate, working, with full access to the financial systems. He would have known it was only a matter of time before the fuller picture emerged. 2 hours ago, he would have done the math. "He's warning someone," she said. "Or running." "He's not running. He has a family here. He's warning someone." She picked up the tablet. "The Sodu meeting tonight. If Daniel reaches the Callahans before 9, they'll know you're coming. They'll know about the payment processor flag. They'll know everything." "How would he know about the processor flag?" "He might not know the specifics, but he knows me. He's watched me work for 5 years. He knows that if I've had a full day and access to their financial records, I've done something to block their ability to move money." She met his eyes. "He doesn't need to know the details. He just needs to tell them that the 9 o'clock meeting is compromised." Tae-won was already moving toward the door. "Wait," she said. He stopped. "If you go to Sodu tonight and they're ready for you, it becomes something different than what you planned," she said. "And if it becomes something different, people get hurt who don't need to get hurt, and the financial piece falls apart because nobody's watching the transaction queue, and the money moves anyway." She came around the table toward him. "Let me call Soo-yeon. Let her tell us whether anything moved in the Callahan accounts in the last 2 hours. If Daniel already warned them, we'll see it in the transaction activity." He looked at her. "One call," she said. 30 seconds. A beat. "Make it," he said. She called Soo-yeon. Soo-yeon had been watching the queue. She confirmed that in the last 2 hours there had been 3 attempted transfers from Callahan-adjacent accounts, totaling just over $800,000. All 3 had been frozen by the flag system. All 3 attempts had happened within the last 40 minutes. Daniel had warned them, and they had tried to run the money immediately upon being warned, and the money was frozen. Nia relayed this to Tae-won in about 12 words. His face as he processed it was something she was going to think about later when she had time to think about things. The particular combination of fury and cold calculation that arrived simultaneously, neither one winning. "The meeting," he said. "They know about it now. They'll either cancel it or use it as a trap." "A trap," he said, "requires resources they don't currently have liquid. Some of their cash is still in the physical reserves, untouchable from my end. Then the meeting might still happen, differently." He was moving again toward the door. "I need to make calls. Stay in the kitchen. Don't go anywhere until I know what we're walking into tonight." "Tae-won!" He was already in the hallway. She stood in the strategy room alone for a moment. On the wall table, the maps. Seattle's industrial corridor, south of downtown, the waterfront, the freight terminals. All of it laid out like a geography of the problem. She looked at Airport Way, at the warehouse district, at the spreading grid of streets where tonight something was going to happen that she had not fully set in motion but had not been able to stop. Her phone buzzed. Soo-yeon. 2 more transfer attempts. Frozen. They're panicking. Then, 30 seconds later, Nia. 1 transfer went through. Nia stared at the screen. "How?" she typed back. "Different processor. 1 I didn't flag. Offshore routing through a Vancouver account. Amount? 2.1 million. It's gone. 2.1 million. Out of the 6 frozen. Out of the 800,000 just attempted." A separate channel she had not found because it used a different processor routed through a Canadian intermediary that was not in any of the LLC structures she'd mapped, because it was newer, because whoever set it up had built it specifically as an emergency exit that would not appear in the primary financial architecture. Raymond certain of it, with the kind of certainty that comes from pattern recognition at the level she operated. The emergency channel had been built by someone who understood the primary architecture well enough to make sure it was separate from it, Someone who had designed both. Someone who had been inside Hanseong Pacific's financial systems long enough to know exactly what a forensic accountant examining the Callahan structure would find and where they would stop looking. Raymond Che had designed the $6 million freeze. Or rather, Raymond Che had designed the Rainier Meridian structure, which meant he had anticipated the possibility that it could be frozen, which meant he had built a back door. And now $2.1 million had gone through that back door. And she didn't know where Raymond Che was. And Daniel Yoon was gone. And Tae-won was somewhere in this building making phone calls. And the SODU meeting was in 1 hour and 52 minutes. And the plan she had built over the last 14 hours, the payment processor flag, the liquidity strangulation, the clean financial dismantling of the Callahan organization without anyone having to go near a warehouse on Airport Way, was sitting in pieces on the floor of a strategy room on Mercer Island. She went to find Tae-won. He was in the hallway outside the strategy room on his phone. She waited the 90 seconds until he lowered it. "The meeting is still on," he said. "My contact inside the freight union confirmed activity at the Airport Way location 20 minutes ago. Callahan people arriving." "They know you're coming," she said. "Yes." "And you're still going?" "Yes." Tae-won. She stopped herself. Reorganized. 2.1 million went offshore 40 minutes ago through a channel I didn't find. There's a person named Raymond Che who I believe designed the entire Callahan financial architecture, including an emergency exit I couldn't see. Daniel is gone and is probably either with Che or on his way out of the city. If you walk into that warehouse tonight and it goes wrong, it won't go wrong. That's not a plan. That's confidence, and confidence is not the same thing. He looked at her. The hallway was narrow and the light was bad, and he was very close, and she held her ground because she had been holding her ground with him for 5 years, and she was not going to stop now because they were in his hallway instead of his office. "What would you do?" he said. Not challenging, actually asking. "I would find Raymond Che first," she said. "Tonight, before the meeting, because Che is the architecture. The Callahans are the structure, but Che is the design. If he disappears with Daniel and that 2.1 million, he rebuilds something for someone else inside of 6 months, and everything we've done today becomes a delay, not a resolution. And if I can't find him before 9, then I need to go with you." Silence. "No," he said. "Not inside the warehouse. I'm not..." She stopped herself again. "Behind the operation, monitoring the transaction queue, because if they try to move the remaining reserves while your people are on the ground, I need to be in a position to freeze it in real time. Soo Yeon can't do that alone. She doesn't know what I know about how their system is structured. She needs me on a call walking her through it." He was looking at her with the expression he had when he was computing something that involved variables he didn't fully like. "You would be doing that from this estate," he said, "or from somewhere else with a connection." "Yes." "From this estate," he repeated. She understood he was not going to negotiate that point. "From this estate," she said. He held her gaze for another 3 seconds. Then Jin appeared at the end of the hallway and said something in Korean that Nia couldn't follow, but Tae-won's response was immediate. He turned, issued 3 quick sentences, looked back at Nia. "Raymond Che," he said. "We have a name match in a shipping industry registry, an address in Pioneer Square." Nia's hand tightened around her phone. "Is someone going there now?" she said. "Right now," he said. She nodded. He moved past her toward the end of the hallway, where Jin was waiting, where the evening was beginning, where the distance between what she had built today and what tonight was going to require was narrowing by the minute into something she had no template for. She called Soo-yeon. "I need you to watch every account simultaneously for the next 4 hours," she said. "Anything moves, you call me immediately. Don't text, call." "Got it," Soo-yeon said. "What happened?" "The plan changed," Nia said. "Changed how?" She looked down the hallway where Tae-won had been standing 30 seconds ago. "Changed into something harder," she said. She went back to the kitchen. She opened the laptop. She pulled up every piece of financial architecture she had mapped since this morning and started looking for Raymond Che's fingerprints in places she hadn't thought to look before. Because if he had built one emergency exit she hadn't seen, he had very likely built others, and if she was going to be useful tonight from behind a laptop on Mercer Island while Tae-won walked into a warehouse where people were waiting for him, she needed to understand the full map before 9 o'clock. She had 1 hour and 39 minutes. She started at the beginning, and she read every line like it was the line that would show her what she'd missed, because somewhere in the architecture of the Callahan financial structure, Raymond Che had left his signature, and signatures were the thing that Nia Holloway had been trained to find in the place where everyone else stopped looking. She found the first one at 7:43, the second at 8:09, and the third, the one that made her stop completely, made her sit back from the screen with her good hand pressed flat against the table and her fractured arm forgotten, and the bruise on her face forgotten, and everything forgotten, except the number she was looking at and what it meant. The third one she found at 8:22, and it did not point to the Callahans at all. It pointed to a set of accounts registered 18 months ago to a holding entity in the Cayman Islands. And the beneficial owner of that entity, buried under 4 layers of corporate structure, was a name she had seen in her financial systems every single day for 5 years. Her own name, Nia Holloway. Someone had built a financial trail leading directly to her. She did not move for 43 seconds. She counted them, not deliberately. It was simply what her mind did when the rest of it was trying to process something that refused to process cleanly, the way a machine keeps counting when the main function crashes. 43 seconds of sitting absolutely still in a kitchen on Mercer Island, with a laptop screen showing her own name attached to a Cayman Islands holding entity that she had never heard of and had certainly never created. Then she started working, not because she had finished processing it, she hadn't, but because the alternative to working was sitting here while the clock moved toward 9 o'clock and Tae-won drove toward a warehouse in Sodo. And the thing that someone had built in her name sat in a server somewhere accumulating weight. She pulled the entity structure apart layer by layer. The Cayman registration was 18 months old. The beneficial ownership documents listed her full legal name, her social security number, which made her stomach clench with a specific kind of cold anger, her home address, and a professional designation of forensic accountant with a notation of employment at Hanseong Pacific Holdings. Whoever built this had access to her personnel file. She kept going. The entity held 3 sub-accounts. 2 were empty. Registration artifacts, she recognized the pattern, placeholder accounts that made a holding structure look more established than it was. The third had movement. Deposits at irregular intervals over the past 14 months. Amounts between $40,000 and $90,000 each time, totaling just over $800,000. 14 months. The same timeline as Daniel Yoon's admission this morning, the same starting point. She sat back. Raymond Che had not just built the Callahan financial architecture. He had simultaneously built a parallel structure in her name, funding it at intervals that would look, to a regulatory examiner, like undisclosed income from a financial professional with access to the exact kind of corporate accounts that were now under investigation. It was a frame, a very good one. Good enough that if the Callahan investigation proceeded, if the suspicious activity report she had filed today triggered a broader federal review, the first thing regulators would find when they pulled on the thread of Pacific Meridian Consulting, Rainier Meridian Freight, and the offshore transfers was a trail that led directly and cleanly to Nia Holloway, forensic accountant, employee of Hanseong Pacific Holdings, the woman who had placed the original account flag. The woman who had, according to these documents, been paid $800,000 to do exactly what she had done, to freeze the money, to create a regulatory hold that would explain why the funds were inaccessible, to make it look like the Callahan's own financial architecture had failed, when in reality the funds had simply been rerouted, legitimately frozen by a regulator on the basis of a filing made by their own paid operative inside Hanseong Pacific. She pressed her palm hard against the table, because the part that was most elegant, the part that made her want to put her fist through the screen, was that the frame was self-tightening. Every legitimate action she had taken today made it worse. The suspicious activity report she'd filed at 1:58 p.m., the payment processor flag, the coordination with Su-yeon, all of it, in the narrative, this structure was designed to tell, looked like a forensic accountant managing a complex money laundering operation with meticulous professional skill. The attack at 2 a.m., the hospital, the message. Tell Kong the books are closed. She said it out loud to the empty kitchen, quietly, because she needed to hear it differently now. The message was never a demand, it was a performance, delivered to her specifically, in a public location, with witnesses, the 911 call, the ER staff, the police report she had filed, to establish that she had been threatened by the people whose money she had frozen, which would make any investigator assume she was an unwilling participant rather than look more carefully at what the financial records said. Except Raymond Che had made the financial records say she was willing. He had made them say she was paid. She picked up her phone and called Tae-won. He answered on the first ring. Road noise behind him. He was already moving. I found something, she said. In the financial architecture. I need you to stop. I'm 12 minutes from Sodu. Tell me. Someone built a financial trail in my name. 18 months of deposits, $800,000. Cayman Islands entity. It's a frame, Tae-won. The whole structure, the account flag, the regulatory holds, everything I did today, it's designed to look like I orchestrated it. Silence on the line. Road noise. Raymond Che, he said. Yes, and I think he built it with information he got from Daniel, but I think he built it before Daniel. I think Daniel was a secondary source, not the primary one. Che had my personnel file, my social security number, my home address. He had things that required deeper access than a legal department employee could pull without leaving a record. How deep, Tae-won said. She looked at the screen. Executive level, she said. HR system administrator access or someone with override capability. Another silence. I'm not stopping, he said. Tae-won, if I stop tonight, the Callahans regroup. The 2.1 million that went offshore funds whatever they build next. I stop tonight, and everything you built today buys us 2 weeks. His voice was flat and certain. I'm not stopping, but I need you to keep working. Everything you can find on Che, on the frame, on where the offshore money went. When I come back, I need to have something to bury him with. She heard the certainty in it and did not argue with the certainty. There's a risk, she said instead. If the Callahans are ready for you tonight, if Daniel warned them fully, then Che knows I've been working in this estate all day. He knows what I've had access to. He may try to do something about that. Jin is there, Tae-won said. I know. He doesn't leave that building until I'm back. I know that too. A pause. Nia. His voice changed slightly, just slightly. Find everything. He ended the call. She put the phone down, looked at the screen. Then she looked at the clock. 8:31. 29 minutes to 9. She called Soo-yeon. Jim appeared in the kitchen doorway 4 minutes later. He did not say anything about the call. She understood he monitored the estate's communication network, that he knew what she'd told Tae-won, that his presence here now was confirmation rather than coincidence. He stood in the doorway and looked at the laptop and at her face. How many ways in and out of this building, she said. 12 points of entry, he said. All monitored, 4 people on rotation. He paused. Nobody gets in. And if they don't try to come in, she said, if they try to knock the network out and freeze my access, can they do that remotely? Jin was quiet for a moment. Then he left the doorway. He came back 90 seconds later with a secondary device. Hardened tablet, cellular connection, no estate network dependency. He put it on the table beside her. Soo-yeon's number is in the contacts, he said. If the main system drops, use this. She looked at him. In 5 years, she had seen Jin perhaps 30 times. He had always been a presence, substantial, quiet, professionally opaque. She had never been sure whether he considered her part of Taiwan's world or a peripheral figure to be managed around. The tablet suggested an answer. Thank you, she said. He nodded once, went back to the doorway, stayed there. She turned back to the laptop and went after Raymond Che. At 8:59, Soo-yeon called. Transaction activity, she said. 3 accounts simultaneously. They're trying to liquidate everything at once. Amounts. First one, 412,000, frozen. Second, 228, frozen. Third, a pause. Third is routing through a different path, same Vancouver intermediary as the 2.1 million earlier. I'm trying to... What's the amount? 900,000. Soo-yeon, can you reach the Vancouver routing point before it clears? I need 4 minutes. You have 3. She heard Soo-yeon start moving, the particular sound of someone who works fast under pressure, keystrokes and muttering, and the specific focus that doesn't have room for anything extra. Nia picked up her phone and sent Tae-won one message. They're trying to move money right now. 3 attempts. 2 frozen. Third in progress. She watched the screen. 8 seconds. His reply. On the ground. Tell me when. She looked at the clock. 9 p.m. Whatever was happening in the warehouse on Airport Way was happening right now, and she was here, and she had never in her professional life felt the particular uselessness of sitting behind a screen while the thing that mattered was occurring somewhere she couldn't see. Got it, Soo-yeon said. The Vancouver account is flagged. Transfer is frozen. Nia typed to Tae-won. Third account frozen. They have no liquid. She waited. No reply. She told herself that meant he was occupied, and not that it meant anything else. She went back to the Che architecture. The frame was good, but it wasn't perfect. Nothing was perfect. And the people who built frames under time pressure always left something. She was looking for the construction seam, the place where Che's knowledge of her ended and his assumptions began, because assumptions were where architects made errors, and errors were what she found for a living. She found it at 922. The Cayman entity's registration listed her date of birth incorrectly. By 4 days. November 9th instead of November 5th. A 4-day error. Small. The kind of thing that appears in documents built from a combination of accurate records and filled-in assumptions. Someone had her year, her month, and estimated the day, or pulled it from a secondary source that had it wrong. The personnel file at Hansong Pacific had her correct date of birth. She had verified it herself during onboarding, which meant Che had not built this entirely from the Hansong Pacific personnel file. He had used another source for at least part of her personal information, a source that had her birth month right, but her exact date wrong. She thought about where her personal information existed with a 4-day date of birth error. Then she thought about it from the other direction. What kind of source gets someone's month right and day wrong? Not a government record, not a credit file, not a professional registration, a reference. A personal reference. The kind of abbreviated background summary that gets passed between people in conversation. Someone who knew her well enough to know her birth month but not the exact date, who had described her to someone building a document and had gotten the day slightly wrong. She pulled up the 6 names from Marcus Webb's list. She went through them again, this time looking not for Callahan connection, but for any point of personal intersection with her own professional history. 3 of them she could rule out immediately. No overlap with her career before Hansong Pacific, no shared professional networks, no plausible point of contact. The 4th was a freight operator she'd audited 3 years ago. He would know her name, he might know her general background, he would not know her birth month. The 5th was Callahan-adjacent legal counsel, who had appeared in one Hansong Pacific contract dispute 4 years ago. Brief contact, unlikely to know personal details. The 6th name she had dismissed twice as a peripheral contractor. Preston Mwangi, Seattle-based financial operations consultant. She had not placed him because he was not in any Hansong Pacific system and had no visible Callahan connection in the documents she'd reviewed. She ran him now, through Soo-yeon's access. The results came back in 6 minutes. Preston Mwangi had worked for 3 years at a financial consulting firm in Chicago. He had left that firm 8 years ago. Nia had worked at that same firm for 2 years before moving to Seattle. Their tenure had overlapped for 11 months. She had not remembered him because he had been 2 levels above her, briefly, in a 60-person operation, and because she had been 26 and learning the work and had not made it a point to memorize everyone she encountered. But he would have known her. At that level in that firm, the junior analysts were visible to the senior consultants in the way that people are visible to people with authority over them. Present, observed, assessed, occasionally remembered. He would have known her birth month from the office birthday calendar. He might have gotten the day wrong. She typed Mwangi's name into the search field and went deeper. His current business registration was a financial operations firm in Bellevue, founded 6 years ago. The same year as Pacific Meridian Consulting. She cross-referenced the registration addresses. Different registered agents. But the same registered agent firm. A Bellevue business services company that handled registration paperwork for a significant number of small consulting entities. She went into the registered agent firm's public client list. Pacific Meridian Consulting Group, Preston Mwangi Financial Operations LLC, and 4 others, all registered within a 6-month window 6 years ago, all using the same registered agent, all with Bellevue addresses within a half-mile radius of each other. Raymond Che was not a single person. Or rather, Raymond Che was a name, and that name was used by a network, and Preston Mwangi was part of that network, and the network had been operating for 6 years, and it had been building infrastructure inside and adjacent to Hanseong Pacific for most of that time. She was reaching for her phone to call Taiwan when the estate's network dropped. Not gradually. Instantly. The laptop screen froze, then went to the connection loss notification. The kitchen lights stayed on. Building power was separate from the network infrastructure. But every connected device in the room went dark. Jin was in the doorway with his phone already at his ear. She grabbed the backup tablet from the table. Cellular connection, still live. She opened it, found Suyan in the contacts, called. "I see it," Suyan said before Nia could speak. "Someone just hit the estate's network node, external. It's a targeted shutdown, not a general outage. Can you get me back in?" Not quickly. They knew the architecture. Of course they did. Che's network had been inside Hanseong Pacific systems for 6 years. They knew the estate's network because they had had 6 years to learn it. "The transaction monitoring," Nia said. "Are you still watching?" "Cellular backup on my end, I have it. Everything frozen. Everything frozen. But Nia, there's activity at a new account I haven't seen before. Smaller entity. Just came live in the last 20 minutes. They're routing through it. Amount building. It's at 60,000 right now and climbing. Can you access that account's registration?" Pulling it. A pause. "It's registered to... It's a Hansong Pacific subsidiary, one of the legitimate shipping entities. Someone is using a real Hanseong Pacific account to move Callahan money." Nia closed her eyes for 1 second. They had someone still inside. Not Daniel. Daniel was gone. Someone else, still inside the legitimate Hanseong Pacific structure, with account access, moving money through a clean entity to make it untouchable by the flags she and Su-Yan had set. "Amount," she said. 140 now, still climbing. "Su-Yan, I need you to flag that account for suspicious activity, right now. Don't wait for me. That's a legitimate Hanseong Pacific account. If I flag it, I know what it is. Flag it." A pause. "Keys." "Done," Su-Yan said. "Transfer frozen. But Nia, this is going to show up as a Hanseong Pacific account under regulatory review. That's going to complicate..." "I know," Nia said. "Flag it anyway." She ended the call. Looked at Jin. "Tae-won," she said. Jin nodded. He was already on his phone. A separate line, she understood, direct to Tae-won's team. He spoke for 30 seconds in Korean, listened, spoke again. When he lowered the phone, his expression had shifted in a way that made her stomach clench. What?" she said. "There was a secondary crew," Jin said. Not at the warehouse, somewhere else." He paused in the way people pause when they're deciding how much to say. "2 of our people are down. Not critically, but down. Tae-won is he hurt?" "No." Jin said it immediately, and she believed it. "He's relocating, coming back." "How long?" 20 minutes. She processed that. Secondary crew. The warehouse on Airport Way was a decoy. Or rather, not entirely a decoy. There were Callahan people there genuinely, but the real operation had been elsewhere. 2 fronts. The warehouse to occupy Tae-won's main team, and a second location where a smaller crew hit something else. "What did they hit?" she said. Jin looked at her. "What did they hit, Jin?" "The freight terminal," he said. "Hanseong Pacific's main terminal at the port. They went in during the confusion, accessed the dispatch office, pulled physical records." He paused. "Document records. Contract files. Physical records. Paper files in a dispatch office. Not digital. Not the system she'd been working in all day. Physical paper, in a building, pulled by people who went in during the window when Taiwan's security team was focused on Airport Way." She sat down. The elegance of it, again. She hated the elegance of it. The digital architecture, the financial flags, the processor monitoring, the system access. All of that was what she'd been fighting all day. And she'd been good at it. She'd frozen everything they tried to move digitally. She'd built a wall they couldn't breach electronically, so they went physical. The contract records in that dispatch office would include Hanseong Pacific's shipping manifests, client records, route documentation, and she ran the filing system in her memory because she had been through those files once during an audit 3 years ago, and the financial reconciliation records from the previous fiscal year. which would include transaction records that, if extracted and selectively presented alongside the Cayman entity documents Che had built in her name, would make an extremely compelling case to any federal investigator that Nia Holloway had been managing a laundering operation through Hanseong Pacific's shipping network. They had not just framed her, they had gone to get the evidence that completed the frame. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She looked at it, looked at Jin, answered. The voice on the other end was male, measured, with a Seattle accent that was slightly softened by something else. Pacific Northwest over an older foundation that was hard to identify. Ms. Holloway, the voice said, my name won't mean anything to you yet, but I think we should talk before tonight gets any further complicated. She kept her voice even. Raymond Che. A pause. Then, Preston Mwangi. Though I suspect you already worked that out. Raymond Che is a structure, not a person. I'm the person. She stood up, moved toward the window, not because the window helped anything, but because she needed to move. Jin tracked her without following. You built the frame in my name, she said. I built insurance, he said. The intention was never to use it. If Kong's operation had continued to develop the way it was going, the Rainier Meridian lease would have expired, the money would have cycled, and nobody would have reviewed a compliance flag that was never filed. The insurance was for a scenario where someone looked too closely. A slight pause. You looked too closely. I was doing my job. Yes, I know. I watched your work for years back in Chicago. You were very good at your job even at 26. I imagine you're exceptional now. His voice was not warm, but it was not cold either. It was the voice of someone conducting a business conversation about terms. Which is why I'm calling, because what you built today has cost us significantly more than anticipated, and because the next step, if this continues, is going to cost you significantly more than you want. Is that a threat? It's a description of a situation. A pause. The documents from the terminal tonight go to a federal contact in the morning unless we reach an agreement. The entity in your name gets dissolved, the documents disappear, and the regulatory holds you place today, which are, as I'm sure you know, reversible given the right documentation, get unwound over the next 2 weeks. The Callahan organization takes its losses on the $6 million and rebuilds. Hanseong Pacific continues operating, and you continue being the most competent forensic accountant on the West Coast with a career intact. Nia looked at Jin. He was watching her with the absolute stillness of someone waiting for a signal. And what do you want in return? She said. The Rainier Meridian hold released, Mwangi said, and the payment processor flags removed. The $6 million. Yes. She thought about the wet asphalt, the 40 seconds, the calm voice in her ear. She thought about Daniel Yoon and 11 years in a story that was smaller than the truth. She thought about 2 of Taiwan's people lying on the ground somewhere near a freight terminal tonight. I'm going to need time to consider that, she said. You have until midnight, Mwangi said. Call this number. He ended the call. The kitchen was very quiet. Soo-yeon called back 7 seconds later, which told Nia that Soo-yeon had been monitoring the call through the cellular connection. I traced the call, Soo-yeon said. Her voice was tight. Pioneer Square. The address that came up for Raymond Che earlier. He's still there. He's still there. And Nia, the Hanseong Pacific account he tried to route through? The one I froze? He just tried it again from a different device. I froze it again, but he's going to keep trying. And if he has access to more subsidiary accounts I haven't flagged, how many Hanseong Pacific subsidiaries are there? In the active account system? 43. 43 accounts. She could not flag 43 accounts for suspicious activity. The regulatory cascade from that would shut down Hanseong Pacific's legitimate operations entirely. She could not leave them open. She could not monitor them all simultaneously. She needed to end this tonight. She texted Tae-won. Pioneer Square. The address from Che's registration. He's there right now. He has the terminal documents. He called me, wants the $6 million released by midnight, or he sends the documents to federal contacts. The reply came back in 40 seconds. How far out is he from the documents becoming a real problem? She thought about it. Federal contact in the morning. We have until dawn before it matters. But he'll run before dawn if he thinks we're coming. 40 seconds. Does he know we know he's there? She looked at the phone she'd answered the call on. Unknown number. He doesn't know I traced it. 20 seconds. Then he thinks he has until midnight. I need 40 minutes. Keep him thinking you're considering the offer. She stared at the message. Then she typed, "Your people at the terminal. How bad? One broken arm, one concussion. They're standing," she breathed out. "Tae-won. The frame in my name. If this doesn't end tonight and it gets to a federal examiner, I can't." She stopped typing, started again. "If it gets to a federal examiner, I can fight it. The date of birth error alone compromises the document integrity. But it will take time and it will be visible, and everything I did today becomes part of the record." His reply took longer this time. She watched the 3 dots appear and disappear twice before the message came. "It won't get to an examiner. Give me 40 minutes. She put the phone down, looked at Jin. "He's coming back," she said. Jin nodded. "I need Soo-yeon to keep watching every subsidiary account. If Mwangi tries to move money through any of them, freeze it. I don't care about the regulatory cascade right now." Jin pulled out his own phone and made a call. She understood after a moment that he was calling Soo-yeon directly, that Soo-yeon was part of Tae-won's network in a way that went deeper than tonight, that the young woman with the custom hardware laptop was not a peripheral resource but a permanent one, and that the speed with which she had been made available this afternoon meant Tae-won had made that decision the moment Nia asked for someone. She filed that. She sat back down at the laptop. Still offline, estate network still dark, and opened the backup tablet and kept working, because there was still 40 minutes, and because she had not finished mapping the Che network, and because the document situation at the terminal was going to require a detailed counter-narrative when the time came, and that counter-narrative needed to be built on facts she had to find first. She worked. At 9:57, her phone vibrated, a text from the unknown number, Mwangi. "Clock is running, Ms. Holloway." She typed back, "I understand the situation. I'm reviewing my options." She hit send. 3 dots. Then, "Don't take too long." She put the phone face down. At 10:14, the estate's network came back online. She looked up at Jin, who had his phone at his ear, and nodded once. Soo-yeon had restored access from the outside, working through the cellular relay. It had taken 45 minutes, which meant whoever had shut it down had been thorough, and Soo-yeon had been better. At 10:22, she heard the gate. She did not go to the window. She stayed at the table with the laptop and waited. Tae-won came through the kitchen door at 10:29. He was wet. It had started raining again somewhere in the last hour. And there was something on the sleeve of his jacket that she looked at and looked away from and was fairly certain was not water. He was moving at the controlled, deliberate pace of someone who was not showing what the last 2 hours had cost him physically, but her eye caught the slight favoring of his left side when he came through the door. She stood up. "Sit down," he said. "You're hurt." "I'm fine. Sit down." "You're favoring your left side." Nia. He said it with the particular flat finality that she had learned meant the conversation was over on that particular topic. "Sit down. Tell me what you found." She told him. All of it. Preston Mwangi, the Chicago connection, the registered agent network, the 6-year operation, the physical records from the terminal, the midnight deadline, the call. She talked for 9 minutes without stopping, organized the way she organized everything, and she watched him absorb it with the same total attention he always gave her when she was talking about something that mattered. When she finished, he was standing at the counter. He had not sat down. "Pioneer Square," he said. "Yes." "He's still there." He was at 10:14 when Soo-yeon's trace last confirmed active network activity from that address. "If he's smart," she stopped. "He's smart enough to have built what he built. He's probably not running yet because he thinks he has until midnight, and because running before midnight tells us he was scared, which tells us we know where he is." "So he stays," Tae-won said. "Until he decides we're not going to deal," she said, "which he'll decide around 11:30 if he hasn't heard from me. Then we have an hour." He looked at her. "I need to go to Pioneer Square." "I know." "Jin stays here." "I know that too." She held his eyes. "Tae-won, the documents from the terminal. If he has hard copies and he gets out, he won't get out. I know you believe that. I'm telling you what happens if you're wrong." She kept her voice level. "If he gets out with those documents, the frame gets submitted. It will take me a year to dismantle it. And during that year, everything I did today, every flag, Every hold, every filing, gets reviewed as potentially motivated by criminal interest. The Callahan money gets released pending review. Everything comes undone. Then I won't be wrong, he said. He was about to leave and she said, "Your side." He stopped. "Let me look at it," she said. "Before you go." A long pause. He turned around and pulled the jacket open. The dress shirt underneath was cut along the left side, maybe 4 inches, and the cut was deep enough. Not enough to be the end of anything, enough to be serious. The bleeding had slowed. She could see he'd addressed it, tape of some kind under the shirt, rough and fast. But the pallor around his mouth was the pallor of someone who had been bleeding and moving for the last 90 minutes, and was not going to admit either. She went to the kitchen and found the first aid kit that Dr. Seong had left on the counter that morning. She brought it back. He did not argue. She worked on the cut with the efficient focus of someone who has no medical training but has been careful her entire life and is not going to become careless now. He stood very still while she did it. Replaced the crude field tape with a proper closure strip, 2 layers, pressed tight. Her hands were steady. His were flat at his sides. When she finished, she stepped back. They were very close in the kitchen and neither of them moved for a moment. 40 minutes, she said. That's what you told me earlier. You came back in 40 minutes from Sodu. Pioneer Square is closer. Come back faster. Something moved through his expression. Something that had been building since 2 in the morning and was very close to the surface right now. Not because he was weak, but because it had been a long day. And long days have a way of wearing through the layers people maintain to keep certain things where they put them. He picked up his jacket. "Keep Mwangi thinking you're considering," he said. "I will." He walked toward the door. At this door he stopped, did not turn around. "The date of birth error," he said. "November 5th. She was quiet for a second. "Yes." "I know it," he said, "because I made sure your file was correct when you joined the company." He walked out. She stood in the kitchen with the first aid kit in her hands, and the door closing and the rain audible against the window, and the laptop screen open to the Che financial map, and 6 years of architecture that someone had built around her professional life like a slow trap. And she thought about what he had just said, and she thought about what it meant that he knew it, and she put the first aid kit down on the counter and sat back at the table. Her phone showed 10:31. She had, at the outside, 90 minutes before Preston Mwangi made a decision that could not be undone. She opened the laptop and went back to the financial map and started building the counter-narrative she would need when everything came to a point, and the laptop fan ran quietly in the kitchen, and outside the rain came down hard on Mercer Island, and somewhere in Pioneer Square a man sat with documents that had her name on them, and Kang Tae-won was driving toward him through the dark, with a cut along his left side, and the particular expression he wore when something had been decided, and the only remaining question was execution. She typed faster. She found the third offshore account at 10:47, a new one, different structure, smaller, registering activity for the first time. Mwangi was trying something she hadn't anticipated, routing through a different jurisdiction entirely, and the amount was not large, but the direction it pointed was. She traced it forward, following the designated beneficiary account through 2 intermediate steps, and arrived at a financial institution in Vancouver that she recognized. The same Vancouver intermediary that had cleared the $2.1 million earlier tonight. The back door was still open. She called Soo-yeon. "I see it," Sun said immediately. 40 seconds ahead of you. I'm trying to reach the beneficiary account, but the Vancouver institution requires—" "Don't try to freeze it," Nia said. "Let it move." Silence. Let it move, Soo-yeon. Track where it goes. I want to know every account it touches from here to wherever it lands. A pause. You want to follow the money. I want to know where his money goes when he thinks he's safe, Nia said. Because wherever it goes, that's where Raymond Che lives when he's not being Preston Mwangi in Pioneer Square. The transfer cleared at 10:53. Soo-yeon tracked it through Vancouver, through a secondary account in the Cayman Islands, a different entity than the one built in Nia's name, and into a final destination account registered to an investment holding company in Singapore. The beneficial owner of the Singapore entity was registered under a third name that was neither Raymond Che nor Preston Mwangi. Nia took a picture of the screen with her phone, sent it to Tae-won with 3 words, his real name. The reply came back in 4 minutes. Not from Tae-won. From Jin, who was standing in the doorway of the kitchen and whose phone was showing a message from Taiwan that Jin turned the screen toward her to read. He ran. Pioneer Square is empty. He knew we were coming. She read the message twice. Then she put the phone down on the table, very carefully, because the alternative was throwing it, and throwing it would accomplish nothing. And Nia Holloway had spent her entire professional life choosing actions that accomplished something over actions that simply expressed how she felt. He ran. Pioneer Square is empty. He knew we were coming. She sat with that for about 30 seconds. Let it be what it was. Let the weight of it settle. The full weight, not the managed version, not the version she would present to Taiwan when he came back, but the real version that she allowed herself in private for 30 seconds before she put it away and kept working. Mwangi had run, which meant the documents from the terminal were with him, which meant the frame was portable, which meant she had until dawn, when he'd said his federal contact would receive them, to find a way to make those documents irrelevant, or to find Mwangi before he could deliver them. She opened the laptop, the Singapore entity, the real name. Whatever Taiwan had seen in those 4 minutes before Jin showed her the message, he had already known it or recognized it, or it had told him something that had sent him somewhere other than back to Mercer Island. She called him directly. 6 rings. Voicemail. She called Jin's number, the one he'd put in the backup tablet. Jin answered. Where is he? She said. A pause. Moving. Where? I don't know the specific destination. Another pause, and in it she heard the careful calibration of someone who had been told what to share and what not to. He recognized the name from the Singapore entity. Who is it? Silence. Jin. Someone from before Seattle, Jin said. From before the company. I don't have more than that. He paused. He said to tell you to keep working. He said the documents are the problem and you're the only one who can solve the documents. She understood what that meant. She ended the call. Looked at the clock. 11:04. Dawn in Seattle in November was around 7:15. That gave her 8 hours and 11 minutes to build a counter-narrative so airtight that the documents from the terminal became the thing that collapsed under scrutiny instead of her. She pulled up the Cayman entity registration. The 4-day date of birth error. November 9th instead of November 5th. She had been thinking of this as a vulnerability in Che's frame. Now she started thinking of it differently. A vulnerability was only useful if someone was looking for it, and the someone who would be looking would be a federal examiner who had been handed a package of documents by an anonymous source and would, in the first instance, accept those documents at face value. The examiner would not start by looking for errors. They would start by looking at the total picture the documents presented. She needed to change the picture before the documents arrived. She opened the suspicious activity report she'd filed at 1:58 p.m. Her name was on it as the reviewing officer. Her professional credentials. Her Hanseong Pacific designation. The details of the Rainier Meridian flag. The methodology. The regulatory basis. This report was already in the federal system, time-stamped, immovable. She had filed it before the terminal documents existed, or rather, before the terminal documents were in Mwangi's hands. The report established, in the federal record, that she had identified suspicious activity and reported it through legitimate channels. That was the opposite of what the frame said she had done. The frame said she froze the money for criminal purposes. The report said she froze the money because she found criminal activity. Both things were in the federal system. The documents from the terminal were meant to explain away the report, to argue that the report itself was a sophisticated cover, filed by a criminal operative to create the appearance of legitimate action while actually controlling the outcome. It was possible. It was the kind of argument a good prosecutor could make. But it required the examiner to believe that a forensic accountant had constructed an elaborate false filing to cover a laundering operation she was running through her employer's accounts. It required them to believe she was both the criminal and the investigator. That argument collapsed if she gave it something to collapse against. She started building. She pulled every communication, email, internal memo, file note that she had generated in the 3 weeks before she flagged the Rainier Meridian account. Every query she had run on the warehouse acquisition records. Every question she had sent to the property management team about the lease discrepancy. Every draft of the audit report she had been working on when she found the suspicious tenant. 23 documents, all time-stamped. all generated through Hanseong Pacific's internal system, which meant they were server logged, which meant they were independently verifiable. They showed a forensic accountant doing forensic accounting, finding something, documenting it, following the thread. Not a criminal operative placing a strategic freeze on assets she controlled. A professional who found something wrong and reported it, and then got dragged out of her car at 2 in the morning by the people whose wrong thing she had found. She organized the 23 documents into a narrative package. Clear sequence, clear methodology. No gaps in the logic, no moments where the story required an assumption, just a paper trail that told the same story in 23 different voices. Then she added a 24th document, the date of birth error. She pulled the Hanseong Pacific personnel file, her own onboarding records, and compared them side by side with the Cayman entity registration. November 5th, November 9th, 4 days apart, different sources. She wrote a one-page analytical memo explaining the discrepancy, its implications for the document's integrity, and the forensic conclusion that the Cayman entity had been built using a secondary source that had her biographical data slightly wrong, a source that was not the Hanseong Pacific personnel system. She attached the Chicago consulting firm's employee directory from 8 years ago, publicly available through the firm's archived website, which listed her name, her role, and a birth month but not a specific date. Then she attached Preston Mwangi's name from the same directory. 11 months of overlapping tenure 8 years ago in a 60-person firm. The memo was 4 paragraphs. It was precise. It said exactly what the evidence said and nothing more. She read it back once. It was the best 4 paragraphs she had ever written, not because they were beautiful. They weren't. They were deliberately plain, the language of a professional report rather than a human being, which was exactly right. But because they were true, and they were documented, and they would make the date of birth error into the thread that unraveled the entire frame for any examiner who pulled on it. She packaged everything, 24 documents, sequenced, indexed, and sent it to the regulatory contacts she had worked with over the course of her career. Not to the general intake, to specific people. 2 senior examiners whose email addresses she had because she had dealt with them professionally and because she was the kind of person who maintained professional relationships carefully over time. She sent the package at 12:47 a.m. with a subject line that was also plain. Proactive disclosure. Potential document fraud related to SAR, filed 11/14. Reviewing officer Nia Holloway. She hit send, sat back. The kitchen was very quiet. Jin had come in at some point in the last hour and was sitting in the doorway chair, not hovering, just present, the way he had been present all day, which she had stopped noticing and now noticed again. The backup tablet was on the counter showing Soo-yeon's monitoring feed, which had been quiet for the last 90 minutes. No transfer attempts, no new accounts activated. Whatever Mwangi was doing in the hours since he'd run from Pioneer Square, he was not trying to move more money. Either he was regrouping, or he was already running properly. The kind of running that meant he had what he needed and was in transit, and the morning would bring what it brought. She poured the coffee that had been sitting in the pot for 2 hours, which was terrible, and drank it standing at the counter. Her arm ached. The splint was doing its job, but the job it was doing was reminding her every 40 minutes that the bone underneath was fractured and did not appreciate being forgotten. Her temple where the stitches were had settled into a low, persistent throb that she had mostly stopped noticing except when she forgot about it and then remembered. It had been 22 hours since 2 men pulled her across broken glass on a deserted street. 22 hours. She thought about that. About the version of herself that had stood up off the wet asphalt and found her phone and made the decision to call him. Not just 911, but him, on his private line at 2:13 in the morning. She had told herself it was the logical decision. That he needed to know. That withholding it would have been worse. She had also, she admitted, now in the quiet kitchen with bad coffee and a fractured arm, been frightened in a way that logic doesn't fully explain, and she had called the person she called when she was frightened, and that person was Kang Tae-won, and she had spent 22 hours since then not examining what that said. She finished the coffee. At 1:51 a.m., the gate opened. She heard it from the kitchen, heard the car, did not go to the window. She was standing at the counter when he came through the kitchen door. He looked worse than when he had left. That was honest, and she let it be honest. The controlled exterior was mostly intact, but the edges had been through something, and the cut along his left side had, She could see from the slight darkness at his shirt, been asked to do more than it should have been asked to do in the last 3 hours. He was moving carefully, still upright, still entirely present in the way that he was always entirely present, which she had always found both reassuring and slightly unnerving. He looked at her, at the laptop, at the clock. "You've been working," he said. "Yes." "The documents." "I filed a proactive disclosure package with 2 federal contacts at 12:47. 24 documents establishing the methodology behind the original flag, the timeline, and a forensic analysis of the date of birth error in the Cayman entity." She paused. "If Mwangi's contact submits the terminal documents tomorrow morning, the examiners will already have the counter-narrative in their inbox. The frame doesn't land clean when the surface it's supposed to land on has already been prepared." He was quiet for a moment. "That's not a guarantee," he said. "No, it's a probability. The date of birth error is documented. The 23 prior communications are server-logged and independently verifiable. The overlap with Mwangi in Chicago is publicly documented." She held his eyes. "It's not a guarantee, but it's the best version of the truth I can put in front of someone, and the truth is actually on my side, which is not always the case when someone decides to come after you." He came to the counter, stood beside her, did not reach for the coffee. "Mwangi," she said. "You recognize the name from Singapore." A pause. "Yes." "Who is he?" Tae-won was quiet for long enough that she understood he was deciding something. Not whether to tell her, she thought, but how much of the deciding to show. 12 years ago, he said finally, before I moved the operation here. There was a financial architect I worked with briefly in Vancouver, someone who built clean structures, corporate faces for things that needed corporate faces. He paused. "We disagreed about the terms of an arrangement. He left. I assumed the matter was settled." "He didn't assume that," she said. "Apparently not." His jaw tightened once. "He waited. Built something adjacent to everything I built. Patient." 6 years, she said. "The Pacific Meridian registration. 6 years he was building adjacent to you. And when the opportunity presented itself, when Daniel became available, when the Callahans were desperate enough to be useful, he used what he had." She looked at him. "He used me. Specifically. He chose me because I was the one person in your structure who had enough access to freeze the money legitimately, which made the frame credible. A criminal operative who actually was your forensic accountant." She paused. "He needed me to be guilty because I was the only one who could have done what I actually did innocently." Tae-won looked at her with an expression she had been seeing in pieces all day and was now seeing whole, not the controlled exterior, not the managed version, but the thing underneath it that he had been keeping behind everything else for a very long time, and that 22 hours of a particular kind of pressure had brought close enough to the surface to see clearly. "Where did you go tonight?" she said. "After Pioneer Square was empty." A long pause. "I found Daniel," he said. She stilled. "He was at his brother's apartment in Renton." He looked at the counter. He confirmed the Mwangi connection, confirmed the timeline, confirmed that Mwangi had approached him 6 years ago, not 14 months ago, and that the consulting payments were the beginning of it, not the extent of it. His voice stayed flat, and she understood what that flatness cost. "He was in it from almost the beginning. He told me 14 months because 14 months was what he calculated I would accept." "He's known about the frame in my name," she said. "Yes." One word. But the weight of it was enormous, and she felt the full weight of it, not for herself, not right now, but for what it meant that someone who had known for 6 years had sat in a room with her, worked alongside her, participated in 11 years of an organization's life, and had been building a structure designed to put her name on a criminal framework while doing it. "What happens to him?" she said. "He's gone," Tae-won said. "As I said this morning, the rest is between him and what he's going to spend the rest of his life knowing about himself." He paused. "I'm not going to destroy his family, but I am also not going to pretend that what he did was something smaller than it was." She nodded. She understood that line, the line between justice and obliteration. She had been thinking about it all day in different forms. The suspicious activity reports, the payment processor flags, the proactive disclosure package. All of it designed to stop the Callahans without becoming the kind of weapon that leaves scorched earth. She had been drawing that line all day, and she was tired of drawing it, and she was also not going to stop drawing it because it was the thing that separated what she did from what the people who had hurt her did. "Mwangi," she said. "He's in transit," Tae-won said. "His cellular connection went dark 40 minutes ago. He's either on a flight or he's in a location where he's cut the signal deliberately." He paused. The Singapore entity, the real name, is someone Interpol has an existing file on under 2 other aliases. "I made a call." She looked at him. "Interpol," she said. "I have a contact," he said simply. She did not ask about the nature of the contact. Some things you did not need to know the full history of. What she needed to know was the implication. "If Interpol has a file," she said, "and if the Singapore entity is flagged, then wherever Mwangi goes, he carries a problem that I didn't create tonight, that predates everything between him and me, and that will follow him into whatever he tries to build next." Tae-won looked at her. "The terminal documents are in his bag. He's traveling with evidence of a break-in at a commercial facility and a package of fraudulent financial documentation built under a stolen identity. If he's stopped at any international transit point, it becomes his problem and not mine," she said. "Yes." She let out a slow breath. It wasn't clean. Nothing about tonight was clean. 2 of Taiwan's people had been hurt. Daniel Yoon had been in a room with her for 5 years. The Callahan money was frozen, but the Callahan organization was not gone, damaged, liquidity strangled, but not gone, and the remaining cash in their physical reserves would rebuild something eventually, smaller and meaner and harder to see. And she had filed a proactive disclosure package that had her name on it as both the subject of potential fraud and the person reporting it, which was going to require explanation to every professional contact she had, and which was going to sit in a federal database with her name attached to it for as long as federal databases kept records. None of it was clean. But the morning was going to come, and she was going to be standing in it, and the frame was not going to land clean, and Mwangi was going to try to cross a border carrying the wrong things, and the Callahans were going to spend the next weeks discovering what it felt like to run an organization that had had its financial architecture systematically dismantled by one woman at a kitchen table. She thought that was probably enough. "Sit down," she said. "Let me look at your side." He did not argue this time. He sat on the chair that Jin had vacated, and she brought the first aid kit back, and she opened his shirt at the left side and looked at what the night had done. And what the night had done was more than she wanted to see, but less than the worst version she had been imagining for the last 3 hours. She worked carefully. He sat still. The kitchen was quiet enough that she could hear the rain had stopped at some point while she was working and had been replaced by the particular silence of a wet night going still before dawn. When she was done, she stepped back. He looked up at her. "The Callahan organization," he said. "Without the 6 million rotating, they have 3 to 4 weeks of operating reserves. Some of that is already being disrupted. The contractor payments that stopped when the Rainier Meridian cycle broke. The defections that come when the money slows. The additional holds I placed today accelerated that." She leaned against the counter. "They'll try to rebuild, smaller, different structure. But rebuilding from this position, with this level of regulatory attention on their financial architecture it's possible, but it's slow and it's expensive. And every time they try to move money digitally in the next 18 months, the flags I built today are going to catch it." She paused. "They're not finished. But they're not going to be putting 2 men on a street corner for a long time." Tae-won nodded. "The Hanseong Pacific Terminal records," she said. "The physical files they took. Even if Mwangi is stopped and the package is recovered, those files were accessed. There will need to be an internal review of what was in that dispatch office and what remediation is required." "I know." "And the subsidiary account that was used to route Callahan money, the one Soo-yeon froze, that's going to be visible in the regulatory review from the suspicious activity report. You're going to need documentation showing how that account was accessed without authorization." "I know that too." "I can build the documentation," she said. "Given the access I had today, I have a complete picture of how the account was compromised. I can put together a report that explains the unauthorized access in a way that protects the company without—" She stopped. He was looking at her. "Without what?" he said. "Without exposing the parts of your organization that don't need to be in a regulatory report," she said carefully. He held her gaze. "That's the line," she said. That's the line I've been drawing all day. Between what's true and what's in a report. Between what happened and what regulators need to see in order to close their review without looking further. She put the first aid kit on the counter. I can draw that line for you. I have been drawing it for 5 years without fully admitting that's what I was doing. But if I keep drawing it, I need you to understand that it's a choice I'm making, not something that just happens because I work for you. The kitchen was very quiet. Tae-won sat with his shirt open at the left side and a fresh closure strip on the cut and the particular expression of someone who has been given something they did not expect and is deciding whether to hold it carefully or set it down. I understand that, he said. I need you to say it differently, she said. A pause. You're choosing, he said, every time, not because you work for me. Yes, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then I need to tell you something, he said. She waited. The operation tonight, he said. The secondary crew at the terminal. The way Mwangi knew we were coming to Pioneer Square. He paused. He knew because he had access to communications from this estate that he built into the network architecture when it was first installed 6 years ago. A passive monitoring node. My security team found it tonight when they restored the network. She processed that. He's been listening, she said, selectively. Enough to know when we identified him. Enough to know that we were moving. A pause. He heard the call you made to me when I was 12 minutes from Sodu, the one where you told me about the frame. She thought about that. About what it meant that he had heard it. That Mwangi had heard her voice telling Tae-won what she'd found, and had understood in that moment that his construction was compromised, and had begun running the shutdown sequence. Network blackout, Pioneer Square evacuation, physical documents from the terminal into his bag. He ran because of that call, she said. Yes. Then the call is why he didn't have time to deliver the documents before going dark, she said slowly. He was supposed to use the midnight deadline as cover, get me to release the money, or get me to refuse and then submit the documents in the morning from a safe location. But when he heard the call, he knew the midnight deadline was over. He went into evacuation mode instead of completion mode. She paused. He left without finishing it. Yes, Tae-won said. That's why the Interpol flag matters, she said. He's running with an incomplete operation and a bag full of documents he never got to use. He's not in a strong position. No, Tae-won said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he heard everything from this kitchen. Yes. She looked around the kitchen, the laptop, the coffee pot, the first aid kit on the counter, the chair where Jin had been sitting, all of it observed, for however long the passive node had been active, by a man in a Pioneer Square building who had been 12 years patient and had chosen her name specifically because she was the best choice available to him and had still not gotten what he came for. Did you find the node? She said. My team removed it at 11:40, he said, after we found it. She nodded. Good, she said. She poured the last of the terrible coffee into the cup she'd been using and added water from the tap to make it slightly less terrible and drank it because she needed something to do with her hands, and because the next thing she was going to say required a moment of ordinary activity before it. There's something else, she said. He waited. The relationship between what I do for the legitimate side of your operation and what I did today. The flags, the processor holds, the coordination with Suyan, the proactive disclosure. She turned the cup in her good hand. Those are not the same kind of work. Today crossed into something different. I made choices today that a forensic accountant who works for a shipping company does not make. And I made them because... She stopped. Because, he said. Because they needed to be made, she said. And because I was in a position to make them. And because I didn't want to be the version of myself who could have made them and chose not to. She set the cup down. But that version of me needs a different arrangement than the one I've had for 5 years. Tae-won was very still. What kind of arrangement? He said. An honest one, she said. I know what you operate. I have always known, in the way that you know things you see clearly, but don't examine directly. I'm done not examining it directly. She met his eyes. I'm not going to help you run the criminal side of this organization. That's not a negotiation. It's just a fact about who I am. But I can do what I did today. Build financial architecture that protects the legitimate operations, identifies threats before they become crises, and draws the line between what goes in reports and what doesn't. And I can do that clearly, as a choice, as a partner, not as an employee who pretends not to see certain things. The word partner sat in the air between them. He did not react to it immediately, which was its own reaction. "That's a different desk," he said finally. She remembered what he'd said in the car, the first night. "Not where you're going." The decisions made quietly, without announcement, that revealed more than the things people said out loud. "Yes," she said. "It is." He stood up. He was close to her in the kitchen. The kitchen was not large, and neither of them had been moving away from the center of it. And he looked at her with the expression that had been building since 2:13 in the morning, when his phone had rung and he had answered before the second ring, and he said, "You should have slept 4 hours on the first night and let me handle it." "I know," she said. "I didn't." "You fractured your arm and filed 3 federal reports and dismantled a 6-year criminal financial architecture and got threatened by phone at 10:30 p.m. That's accurate. And you're standing in my kitchen at 2 in the morning talking about desk arrangements. Also accurate," she said. Something shifted in his expression, not the dramatic version, not the version where a face transforms suddenly and completely. The real version, where something that has been held in place for a long time is simply allowed to stop being held, and the change is visible in small things, the line of his shoulders, the set of his jaw, the way he was looking at her, which was not the way a man looks at an employee or an asset or a problem to be managed. "The desk arrangement," he said, "is something we can discuss when you've slept." "I've been awake for 22 hours, she said. 23. "I'm not counting." "I am," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. The distance between them was very small, and neither of them had made it smaller deliberately, and neither of them moved to make it larger, and the kitchen was quiet, and outside the November night was going still and cold and dark in the way that the hours before dawn go still, and the rain had stopped, and somewhere in the distance the first hint of the city's 5 a.m. stirring was beginning to move through the silence. She said, "You knew my birthday." "Yes." "You verified my personnel file when I joined." "Yes." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment, not the silence of someone deciding whether to answer, the silence of someone deciding how simply to say something they have been not saying for a long time. "Because you were going to know everything about this company," he said, "and I needed to know that everything in your file was correct, that it was real." He paused. "That you were real." "And now," she said. "Now I know November 5th, he said. "And I know you file 3 federal reports before you sleep. And I know you stayed at this table from 8 in the morning until 2 in the morning and found everything there was to find. And I know your hand was steady when you worked on my side and shaking when you thought no one was watching." He paused. "And I know that you called me from the hospital, not just 911. She was quiet. "I called you because you needed to know," she said. "I know why you told yourself you called," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. She was 32 years old, and she had been brilliant her entire life, and had worked 70-hour weeks, and had chosen precision over almost everything else, and had spent 5 years in the orbit of a man who was fundamentally dangerous, and had told herself the distance was professional, and the clarity was professional, and all of it was professional, and she had believed that mostly, until 2 in the morning on a wet street had rearranged certain things. "I need to sleep," she said. "I know. We can talk about the desk tomorrow." "Yes." "And the arrangement, the formal terms of it, what I will and won't do." "Yes," he said. "All of it." She picked up the backup tablet from the counter and the notepad in her phone. The ordinary things. The tools of the version of her life that had just changed into something she didn't have a complete map for yet, which was unusual for her, and which she was deciding to treat as acceptable. She walked toward the kitchen door. At the door she stopped. "Your side," she said. Don't sleep on it." "I'll sit up," he said. "I'm serious." "So am I." She looked back at him, standing in the kitchen with his shirt open at the left side, and the closure strip she'd applied visible against his skin, and the look on his face that was not managed or controlled or armored in the way it had been for every version of their professional interaction she could recall, and the November night going quiet outside. "Good," she said. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the window, dark outside. The lake was invisible behind it, just a black surface that reflected nothing at this hour. In 4 hours, it would be dawn, and whatever Mwangi was carrying in a bag at an international transit point somewhere would either be flagged or it wouldn't. And the proactive disclosure package would either change the picture for the federal examiners or it wouldn't. And the Callahan organization would spend the next weeks discovering what it looked like when the person they'd chosen to pressure turned out to be the last person they should have touched. She set the notepad on the nightstand. She thought about the Rainier Meridian file, the 11:30 discovery, the routine flag, the 4 clicks that froze $6 million and changed everything. She had done it without thinking about it, without knowing what she was touching. The most consequential professional action of her career had been procedurally routine, and the reason it had been so effective was precisely because she hadn't been trying to be effective. She had simply been doing her job with the full, undivided attention she brought to everything. She thought about that for a moment, about what it meant that her natural professional instincts had, without strategic intent, strangled a criminal organization's cash flow and triggered a chain of events that had pulled an 11-year betrayal into the light, exposed a 6-year frame built in her name, and forced the man who had spent 12 years building something patient and dangerous to run from an empty building in Pioneer Square at 10:50 p.m. with an incomplete operation and a bag full of documents he'd never gotten to use. She had done all of that with one flag. And then she had done the rest of it from a kitchen table with a fractured arm. She thought about the version of herself that had stood up off the wet asphalt 23 hours ago and decided not to be the easiest variable to remove from the equation. She thought that version of herself had made the right call. She lay back. The ceiling of the guest room was plain, clean, unremarkable. The kind of ceiling you don't look at long enough to memorize. She looked at it anyway, for the few minutes before her eyes closed, because it was there and it was quiet and it was not a laptop screen or a financial map or a 6-year architecture built around her name. Her arm ached. Her temple pulled slightly where the stitches held. The bruise on her cheek was going to look terrible for another week. She thought about the desk arrangement, the honest version of the work, named clearly, agreed to clearly, without the years of professional pretense that had made it seem like something it wasn't. She thought about what it would feel like to do the thing she was good at without explaining it away. And she thought that it would feel, probably, like the last 23 hours, difficult and costly, and sometimes frightening, and occasionally requiring her to press her hand flat against a table and wait for 30 seconds before she kept moving. She thought she could do that. She thought she had already been doing it. Outside in the quiet before dawn, Seattle sat under cleared sky for the first time in days. The lake reflected stars that were faint and cold and distant. The freight terminals at the port were running their first shift. The Callahan organization's contractor network was quiet, phones unanswered, payments missing, the particular silence of an organization that has discovered it cannot pay the people who keep it operational. And in a transit terminal somewhere between Seattle and a country that had not yet been determined, a man with a bag full of documents and 3 aliases and 12 years of patience was discovering what it felt like to run without having finished what he came to do. Carrying evidence of a frame that had already been reported to the people he intended to report it to, moving toward a border that had a flag on his real name. Not clean, not easy, not the version where everything resolves without cost, but real, and forward-moving, and built on things that were true. In the kitchen, 1 floor below, Kang Tae-won sat in the chair that Jean had vacated, the kitchen quiet around him, the city beginning its slow pre-dawn movement beyond the windows. He sat with the deliberate care of someone managing a physical cost he was not going to show. He did not turn a light on. He sat in the dark kitchen with the lake outside and the slight sound of the building settling in the cold. And he thought about 12 years, and 6 years, and 5 years, and 23 hours, and November 5th. He thought about a woman standing in a hospital hallway at 4 in the morning who had apologized for disturbing him. He thought about what it would mean to have a second desk in his office. 2 signatures. He thought about that for a long time. When the dawn came, gray and cold and honest, coming across the water from the east the way it always did in November, it found the estate quiet. Jin at his post. Su Yeon's monitoring feed running on the counter tablet, green across every account. The laptop closed. And Nia Holloway asleep in the guest room, her notepad on the nightstand, one hand open on the pillow, breathing steadily. The books weren't closed. They were being rewritten, from the beginning, by the only person who had ever understood them well enough to know where the real numbers were. That was enough. For now, That was everything.